Albert was something of a phenomenon in the English court. First of all, he had a good education. Most of the English peers were not particularly well educated and proud of it, like Americans. He was a very accomplished musician. He composed, played the organ, composed for the organ. He played the piano. He had a good voice, he had a light baritone voice. They all were musical, by the way, and they sang together as a family as it grew. He studied English law. He knew this was going to be practical for him. He was interested in the sciences. He'd had an engineering training. He'd been to university, of course. So he had a lot of qualities going, and he became quite a patron of the arts and helped educate the Queen in this way, too. Her background was very limited. She wasn't stupid. It was just a matter she didn't have the opportunities that men had then for a formal education. It wasn't thought necessary. But the court and the country resented Albert. He was a German. He was a foreigner. He spoke with an accent. Well, they'd forgotten the fact that the Queen was just as much German as was her husband. She didn't speak with an accent, but she was his first cousin, and they were both as German as you could make them. No, that didn't matter. He was the foreigner. And he never got out from under this. The courtiers resented him because he was just too good for the room, as we say in Las Vegas. But they got along famously, and in November of that year, the Queen gave birth to their first child, a daughter, who was then christened Victoria after her mother. And this, of course, would be the first of several children that they would produce. Like most married couples, there were moments when there were disagreements and awkward times, and there were exchanges that were a little testy and so on. They were human. The thing was that Victoria would pull rank on her husband in these little domestic scenes. And of course this bothered him. Oh, just irritated him to death. So one day, apparently it was too much for him. They'd had a little tiff over something, and he simply bowed to her, went into his bedroom, shut and locked the door. Now they were civilized. They occupied separate rooms. Listen up. And when she heard the lock go over, oh, she was furious. She went over. The voice came out, "Who is there?" "The Queen, Albert. Let me in." "The prince is not at home." "Oh." "Who is there?" "The Queen. You know it's the Queen. Let me in." "The prince is not at home." "Who is there?" "Your wife. Your poor wife. Let me in." Well, he threw open the door and took her in his arms. And that was sort of that. She caught on. Now, you see, he had to be a deferential prince. He was not a reigning figure in this. She was the reigning element. And he had to be deferential. And we had a little talk about deference last month. I don't know if you remember. But he always had to step one step behind her, just as the Duke of Edinburgh has to step behind the Queen. I don't know if you notice all this. He sits on a chair that's 1 inch lower than the Queen, and so on. And so he's always a secondary figure at the head of the government, and as was Prince Albert. And he understood this. He knew this. He accepted this. No problem at all. But at home, in their private surroundings, he was, after all, a German, a Prussian, or at least most of his relatives were Prussian. And at home, Papa is in charge.